Tonight, then, we return to our examination of Pilgrim's Progress, where we left off a couple weeks ago, as we were in the midst of a section entitled About the Lord of the Hill. And I'll refresh your memory as to what we're talking about here. In the midst of this, Christian has come to a place called the Palace Beautiful. The title of the place is Beautiful. It's a palace called Beautiful. And he is questioned by a number of people in that particular place, Prudence, Piety, and Charity, who question him. Porter meets him at the door, and he is welcomed in. And then in the first half of this section we're in, there's a conversation that takes place between Christian and the others in the house, which is a discussion of the Lord of the Hill. Who is he, the owner of this hill, the owner of this palace? What does it mean to belong to him? And so they had a meal around a table, and they talked through the day and talked about the nature of the gospel in the midst of that place. And you remember, as we speculated, that Bunyan is picturing for us in this allegory, he's picturing for us the church, the place where we gather together as brothers and sisters to be edified and strengthened and to find comfort and help and so forth. And so he's picturing this palace as the church. That's what he's painting as a picture of it. And so one of the first things we learn is that this is a place where the conversation should be around the Lord of the Hill, who is the Lord of the church. The conversation was about him. So the primary point that Bunyan makes as he starts off this section is to point out that the church is to be a place in which those who are under the lordship of the Lord of the Hill, those who are on the path leading to Mount Zion, those who are going by faith from the wicket gate to the celestial city, they come together in this place for the purpose of speaking of him. Who is he? All right? Now, you will notice, as we continue on with our examination of this section, that Bunyan paints this as 3 days. He paints it as 3 days that Christian is there in this place. So at the end of the first day, which was our discussion last time, we see at the top of page 21 that they conversed together till late at night, and after they had committed themselves to their Lord for protection, they betook themselves to rest. So they went to bed. And they had a place for Pilgrim in a large upper chamber whose window opened towards the sun, meaning towards the east, and the name of the chamber was Peace, where he slept till the break of day. It's a picture of a place where we find rest, peace, comfort, that sorts of things. That's one of the things that the church is supposed to provide for us. In fact, one could make a very good argument that the way Bunyan paints this allegory is all of that discussion that they had about the Lord of the Hill led him to a good night's sleep. He was comforted by all of that stuff that he had learned and they had talked about and conversed about, and it led him to a place of comfort and a good night's sleep. Which leads then to the second day, which is the second paragraph on page 21. The next day, that is after the morning, right? The next day they took him and had him into the armory. An armory is a place where weapons are stored. It's where you store your weapons and your ammunition. The little church that we started in Phillipsburg as an offshoot of Grace Fellowship actually began its meeting in an armory there in Phillipsburg. It was a no longer used armory. It didn't have any weapons in it. When they brought their Bibles, it did, but it didn't have any weapons in it, but they started in an armory. So it's a place where you go to find your weapons and your ammunition, what you need to fight the enemy. Where they showed him all manner of furniture. Now, that's an Old English word, okay? It doesn't mean what we use it to mean, like, couches and chairs and tables and lamps, right? We think of that as furniture. No, furniture is furnishings. This is another way of saying that. What you need to be furnished with in order to go out and deal with the enemy. In fact, the very next section, as you can see if you turn the page, is going to be Christian getting into a fight. All right, so there's an anticipation of that here. So the furniture is what he could be furnished with, if you will, for him to deal with the enemies that are to come. All right, so don't be misled by that word, which has come to have an entirely different meaning in the 21st century than it did in the 17th. Where they showed him all manner of furniture which their Lord had provided for pilgrims. Notice the colon, all right? So here's a whole series of things that the Lord has provided for the pilgrim. And Bunyan lists several of them: sword, shield, helmet, breastplate, all prayer, and shoes that would not wear out. Where's the imagery from? Ephesians 6, the armor. Who can tell me which one is missing? What's that? The belt of truth, the girdle of truth. King James girdle, modern translations. The belt of truth is missing. I don't know why. I really don't. I have absolutely no reason why that he decided not to include that belt. Maybe he just overlooked it, or maybe he had a reason. I don't know. I'm not going to read anything into it. But he does list the others. And in this case, he lists prayer by using the term all prayer, which is probably his way of simply saying the accoutrement of prayer becomes, if you will, a part of the armor. So in the allegory, he has to turn it into something physical, right? A sword, a shield, a breastplate are all physical things. So he calls it all prayer. I think all he's doing is he's simply saying, in this allegory, imagine Christian looking into a room and seeing all the parts of what Paul speaks about in Ephesians 6. I think that's all there is to it. It's not any more complicated than that, I think. But each of these, as you see in Ephesians 6, each of these they're mentioned in Ephesians 6, okay? So those are the things that are found for the pilgrim. Now, again, where is it? It's in an armory. And where is that armory? In the palace, in the church. So Bunyan's implication here is these are things that extend out, if you will, from the church. These are the things that we, as the church, equip one another with. We are given, quote unquote, these various things by virtue of our connection to one another in the body called the body of Christ. So we receive the sword of the word, the shield, the helmet, all these sorts of things as a part of our communal relationships to one another. So he's making sure that these things are not disconnected from the church in some sort of theoretical sense. They're a part of the communal life of the body. We are given them together. It doesn't mean that we don't get them individually, obviously, and it doesn't mean that they're not available to us outside of the church. I'm not suggesting that. But I'm saying that what he's doing is he's making sure that the church is an institution designed by Christ to equip the saints to go out and do what is needed to do. Okay? We're equipped to go out. And that's a key theme, by the way, in the book of Ephesians. So these are the things that are available to him. We'll come back to that more in a second. All right. They also showed him some of the instruments with which some of his servants had done wonderful things. Okay, so Bunyan gives a list here of things that he points out as implements used by others in the past as a part of defeating the enemies, their enemies. So he gives them a list. So apparently they're allegorically stored in this armory in order that we can see them. Now, we'll come back to that in a second. But okay, so they showed him Moses' rod, all right? And notice the references to Exodus 7, where Moses turned the Nile red with his staff. Chapter 10, where he brought locusts forth. Chapter 17, where he struck the rock and brought forth water. And then, out of fairness, Bunyan throws in Numbers 20, verse 11, where Moses strikes the rock again, even though he wasn't supposed to. Okay? But it's the staff of Moses that, is pictured as an implement that Moses used to conquer the enemies of the people of Israel, their slave owners, and the other enemies like thirst and hunger that he used. Okay, so he used this staff to bring about to overcome the enemies of the people of Israel. All right. So the first one is that. And then he shows them the pictures with which Gideon put to flight the armies of Midian. And you remember that was in Judges chapter 7 when Gideon had a small army, and verse 19, he had an army of just 100 men coming to the outskirts of the camp in the middle of the watch when they had just set the watch. And they blew the trumpets and smashed the jars that were in their hands. Then the three companies blew the trumpets and broke the jars. They held in their left hands the torches and their right hands the trumpets to blow. And they cried out, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." Every man stood in his place around the camp while all the army ran. They cried out and fled. When they blew the 300 trumpets, the Lord said, "Every man's sword against his comrade and against all the army." It made it appear as though Gideon was coming with a great army against the Midianites. It was not, obviously, but these breaking of these jugs gave this impression that there was big time armament coming. Okay, so Bunyan puts it into this allegory as another of these implements that were used by the people of God to overcome their enemies. A third example is the jawbone with which Samson did such mighty feats. Again, Judges 15:16, right, where he takes a jawbone of a donkey and slays 1,000 Philistines with it. I can't even imagine what that must have looked like. You know what I mean? That thing was covered with blood when he was done, which is why, by the way, he throws it, and the place becomes known as the Hill of the Jawbone. Yeah. But it's an implement. What is Samson doing? Striking down his enemies, attacking the enemies of the people of God. It becomes another implement to do that. And then they showed him, moreover, the sling and stone with which David slew Goliath of Gath. Okay, once again, you know the story, right? A little stone that he slings at Goliath, hits him in the head and kills him. Again, another implement used to take down one of the enemies of the people. So those four are taken by Bunyan out of the Old Testament to demonstrate that God had used various implements to help the people to overcome their enemies in the past. All right, so they're being used as examples here in this armory. Notice they're sitting in the armory and Christian can see them in this place. So they've been collected and put here. Now, let me just pause and note something here. I don't think that Bunyan is making a commentary here on the medieval use of relics or the medieval worship of relics here. If you may not be aware of what I'm talking about, let me explain. There was during the Middle Ages of the church, from the end of the primitive church in about 300 to about the time of the Reformation, during the medieval period, there was a very strong mystic fascination with relics, finding parts of things that belong to saints or belong to bits of the cross, or finding the stable that housed, or the manger that housed Jesus, all those kinds of things. There was a deep fascination with relics in the medieval church, a deep mysticism about that. And it really rose to its pinnacle just before the Reformation. It still continues today. There are still parts of the world where people will make pilgrimages to places to see where the Virgin came, for example, to visit with the kids and so on. There's all kinds of that sort of mystic kind of things going around. So it's been out there for a very, very long time. I would argue that the reason for it, the reason why, is because human beings are fundamentally superstitious of their very nature. And what we have a tendency to do is, well, if sacraments can help me to be saved, then if I can go and touch the bones of a dead saint, that's really going to help. That's going to add to my holiness in the sacramental system. So to me, the relics, or the fascination with relics, is really a symptom of the lack of proper theological training in the issues of justification. When the church abandons the idea of justification by faith and replaces it with justification by sacramental system, it's only one step further for the people to then say, well, let's just go find whatever we can find to help us be more holy. I mean, if after all, going to Mass on Sunday makes me, one more step of justification, maybe I can take 3 steps if I can touch the bones of St. Nicholas, which, by the way, I saw when I was in Greece. There's a church there that houses the bones of St. Nicholas. So I don't think, though, that Bunyan is making a comment on that, although you'll notice I noticed it. Now, I noticed it because I come from that background, right? I come out of that world, so you may not have noticed it, but I noticed it. And as I said, the relic iconoclasty rose up significantly by the time Bunyan would be writing this. As the Reformation began to break out, the Catholic Church is deep into this stuff. See? So I don't think he's making a comment on it, but I did.
I wonder if your interest in touching bones came from where that dude was thrown into Elisha's grave and encountered his bones and resurrected.
Yeah, that's certainly a possibility. Although I've not really ever heard a Catholic use that as an example. But then again, it may have been so far back in the tradition that it's been forgotten, and now all you have left is the practice, not the underlying reasoning. I mean, there was somebody, I don't remember who it was, who said that if you collected all the pieces of the cross that are apparently relics, you'd have like 10,000 of them. I don't remember who that was that said that, and it may be apocryphal, but it is true. It is true. But there is one more that Bunyan adds, and notice this one is not a past tense item, but a future tense item. The sword also with which their Lord will kill the man of sin in the day that he shall rise up to the prey. The man of sin is first mentioned, as you see in 2 Thessalonians 2:3, as Paul is discussing the reality of the return of Christ and makes mention of the fact that the man of sin must come first and be destroyed. And then there are 2 references to Revelation get us to that place where Satan is bound and then Satan is released. And so the prevailing idea that's often placed against the man of sin is that it's some particular individual who will rise up to be some sort of world-dominating, sinful individual, often called the Antichrist. There's a billionaire out there, I forget his name, that's about to produce a series of videos on the nature of the Antichrist. He's not a believer, but that's what he's doing. I don't know. I forget his name. I think it's Pete something, but anyways. But this particular imagery is the imagery of Christ coming with his sword, as you see it in Revelation chapter 19, where a sword coming forth from his mouth strikes down the man of sin. Okay, that's the picture that's painted. Now, again, we could get into a deep eschatological discussion here of the realities of this being an actual person or whether it's a metaphor within the book of Revelation, how you understand the book of Revelation, all these sorts of things. That's not Bunyan's intention. I think all he's really intending to do here is simply point to another implement, quote unquote, that will be used by the Lord himself to strike down the enemies of the people. Again, the whole point of all these 5, I think, is to give Christian that sense of assurance that God will provide him what he needs in the face of his enemies. In the worst case scenario, Christ is going to take his sword and kill off the man of sin. So it becomes assurances to Christian as he goes out. And you will notice, even as we close this section and go into the next one, how important that will be for Christian, having that kind of assurance, okay? So he's shown all these things as a great assurance to him that in the battle that he's going to have to fight as he continues along, he's going to need what he needs, which leads to the last sentence of the paragraph. Now his friends prevailed upon Christian, and he was harnessed from head to foot in what was proof, protection, against assaults. And there's the quote from, or the reference to Ephesians 6:11. So he is given these items that are mentioned earlier, the sword, the shield, the helmet, the breastplate, all prayer, and shoes. These are the things he's given. They are put on him. Okay, remember, this is an allegory, right? So they're put on him in an allegorical sense for him to go out now and to deal with the enemies as he's going to come. And what you'll notice in the next section, he's definitely going to rely on these implements for his protection against Apollyon. That's coming next. Okay? So this day is spent preparing Christian to go out to deal with the realities of the world that he's going to have to face, the enemies he's going to have to face to his faith. So day one was discussion about who the Lord is and what the Lord has done and so forth. The second day is giving him the tools that he needs to be able to go out from the palace beautiful and deal with the realities in the world out there. Okay? So you see those two things in these 2 days. Now, notice the next paragraph. His friends say, "If the day be clear by morning, we will show you the delectable mountains, which," they said, "would yet further add to his comfort. On the morrow," okay, that would be on the next day. Okay, so now we're to the third day now. On the next day, he saw in the distance from the housetop the delectable mountains near his desired haven. And there's a reference to Isaiah 33 here. And I think this is important. In Isaiah chapter 33, I'm going to start in verse 15 instead of 16. Actually, I'm going to start in 13. "Hear, you who are far off, what I have done, and you who are near, acknowledge my might." Okay, who's speaking here? God is speaking. Okay, so God is speaking. "You are far off, what I have done, and you are near, acknowledge my might. The sinners in Zion are afraid, trembling has seized the godless." Here's what they say. "Who among us can dwell with the consuming fire? Who among us can dwell with everlasting burnings?" Okay, how can we dwell with the holiness of God in this place as sinners? Answer, "He who walks righteously and speaks uprightly, who despises the gain of oppression, who shakes his hands lest they hold a bribe." In other words, he shakes out any money's given to him, he shakes his hands out. "Who stops his ears from hearing of bloodshed and shuts his eyes from looking on evil. He will dwell on the heights. The place of defense will be the fortress of rocks. His bread will be given him, his water will be sure." Verse 17, "Your eyes will behold the king in his beauty. They will see a land that stretches afar." What they will see is what God has promised to those who are righteous. Those who are unwilling to take a bribe, those who are willing to look upon bloodshed, those who don't look at evil, those who are righteous, those who cry out, "How can we live as sinners?" And the answer is those who are willing to be holy. Now, we know the New Testament answer to who can be holy, right? That has to be a work of God. But nonetheless, this is what it's saying. "And your eyes then, you who dwell on the heights, the place of defense will be the fortress of rocks, you will behold the king in his beauty. You will see a land that stretches afar." And I think the imagery that's being painted that Bunyan is pointing to here is that sense of assurance that comes from knowing what it is that God in Christ is ultimately going to do. Our hope is built not on the momentary successes of this life, but ultimately on what God is going to do. So Bunyan is painting a picture where from the church, as they go stand on the top of the palace, he looks out, and in the distance, he sees these delectable mountains, he calls them. He's making the reference to Isaiah 33. It is a place off in the distance. So it's not under him yet. It's yet to be found. So it's yet in the distance. It's not right here. He's got to go there. He's got to travel to that place. So he sees it from a distance as one who is, according to Isaiah 33, the one who is righteous, the one who is willing to do what is good and what is right and what is pure. So he sees them. And then it says, or this is what Bunyan writes, it was Emmanuel's land. Okay, so he puts in that this is the Lord's land. I think he uses the word Emmanuel here because he wants to make sure that his audience recognizes that the Lord that he's pursuing is, of course, God with us. So it's the divine one who is the one upon whom Christian is pursuing. And so the place that Christian is pursuing is owned by God with us, who of course we know is Jesus Christ, the God-man, God with us. So it's Emmanuel's land. And now listen to this phrase carefully. And it is as common, said they, as this hill is to and for all the pilgrims. Now what does that mean? What does he mean as it's common? He means that it is common to all or belongs to all who are, like himself, traveling as a pilgrim to that place. So it's a place that all pilgrims are going. It's common to them. It's theirs. The word common could be a 16th century idiom of saying it is the inheritance, the place where you get it. It belongs to you. It's common to you, you might say, in that it is something that you will possess because you go there and it's yours. Now, it belongs to the Lord of the Hill, right? It belongs to Emmanuel. It's his, but he's giving it to those who come there. So both imageries are being painted. Now, we know that, of course, is precisely what the kingdom will look like, what heaven will look like, what the new heavens and the new earth will look like. It's a future time in which all of this life's difficulties are done away with in a glorified state. Okay? And that's what we're looking forward to. We're going to that place because that's where we are looking forward to. So he's seen it now, and he's seen what it's all about, which is the other thing the church does. The other thing we do. We not only talk about who is the Lord of the Hill and what he has done and who he is, and we not only equip you to go out into the world to deal with the realities of this world, but we also send you out with hope of something that's to come. Something beyond the world you're going to look at. Because just like Pilgrim, you're going to have to trudge through and fight off enemies that are going to come against you. But your hope isn't in surviving in this life. The hope is getting there, to that place. I think that's the picture that Paul paints in both Philippians and Colossians, much more in Philippians, where he talks about his hope being in what he is looking forward to in the resurrection, in the day of the Lord, when the Lord comes and establishes all things and raises him to new life, to glorified state. Paul says, look, I have to go here and I have to make it through this, but my hope is built, my assurance is built on that day, when that day comes. I'm looking forward to that day. And so we go out from the church, we go out with knowing who Christ is and what he has done, because we've been taught these things. We go out equipped with what we need to deal with the realities of the world around us, and we go out with a hope in where we're going. Those are the things that the church is supposed to provide. That's what the church is supposed to be. I think if Bunyan were fast-forwarded by time travel to our day and walked into the typical evangelical church in America, he would say, doesn't it look anything like this picture? Because first of all, you're not talking about Christ much. And secondly, you're not really equipping people with what they need to deal with the enemies of life. And you seem to have placed the hope in this world rather than in the delectable mountains. So I think this is a picture that Bunyan is painting of what he thinks the church is supposed to be. Now again, this would be very contrary, and again I speak from experience, this would be very contrary to the medieval church prior to the Reformation. And even during the Reformation, after the Protestants broke away. The idea that the church is really nothing more than a place where you go to try to somehow gin up some sort of satisfaction of God. And good luck with that. Bunyan has a much higher view of the church, doesn't he? He has a higher view of the Lord of the church. He has a higher view of the content and activities of the church and ultimately what the church is supposed to accomplish. He has a much higher view of that. So he paints, I think, a picture of that. And being a pastor, it certainly makes sense that he would. So now he is clothed in his armor, ready to go, and he has seen where he's going. He has seen the land that he's heading towards, and it's delectable. Now he bethought himself of setting forward. Time to go. He walked out with his friends to the gate, and there he asked the porter if he had seen any pilgrims pass by. Have you seen any other believers go by that are on this path? Then the porter answered, yes. Yes, I have seen some other faithful ones. Pray, did you know them? Did you know him? Said Christian. The porter responds, I asked him his name, and he told me it was Faithful. Now, we're going to meet Faithful a little later on in this story, all right? But at this point, we're introduced to another pilgrim whose name is Faithful, who is traveling along the way. Oh, said Christian, I know him. He is my townsman, my near neighbor. He comes from the place where I was born. So this is another person who has come out of the city of destruction, undoubtedly under the preaching of evangelist, as Christian has, and now has set off, as Christian has, to this place. He's just a bit ahead of Christian on the journey. Now, I don't think there's too much to read into that other than it's part of the story. Okay. How far do you think he may be before me? Porter says, he has got by this time below the hill into the valley of humiliation. Okay. Now, I don't want to read Bunyan's mind, and I don't want to put any thoughts on his mind, I don't want to put any words in his mouth. But it seems to me as though Porter says, yes, there is another Christian going along the way, but guess where he is? He's ahead of you in a place called the Valley of Humiliation. What's the implication of that? That's where you're going. It's not going to be a good place. That's where you're headed. That's where he headed. That's where you're going. I would say this is an honest pastor. He doesn't say to Christian, well, everything's going to be just fine. Everything's going to be just hunky-dory. Don't worry about it. Just, carry on and you'll make it to the delectable mountains. No, he actually, I think, by virtue of telling him where Faithful is at, it's in a sense a warning to Christian. You are about to go down this hill. You've come up this hill, and now you're going to go down this hill. And as you go down this hill, you're going to be eventually getting to the place of humiliation. Now, we'll get to the Valley of Humiliation a little later on. Not before Christian has an interesting event take place before he even gets down the hill. But the porter's being honest with him, isn't he? Porter's being honest. What you're about to face difficulty. Faithful's facing it already. You're about to go forth and face it as well. It's something that preaching should be. Honest. What does the Lord really say? It's not going to be easy. It's not an easy life. Christ doesn't call us to an easy path. Nope. In a sense, the path that we walk is the very path that Christ trod carrying his cross out to Golgotha. Pick up your cross and follow me. And where am I going? I'm going to the hill of death. And that's where you're going. Now, your hill of death is to kill off all that old nature in you, to kill off all that which was a part of your old nature. That's the cross you're carrying. You're going to kill off, as Paul says in Colossians, you're going to kill off that old self. But nonetheless, it requires discipline, doesn't it? It requires honesty. Guess what? Trouble lies ahead. The enemies are out there. And it's also interesting that this is called the Valley of Humiliation. Being introduced to it here, the word humiliation could be used in either a positive or negative sense. One way is it could be used in a positive sense of you're going to a place where you're going to be humble, and that's a good thing. The other is you're going to a place where you're going to be humiliated, which is the negative way of thinking of this word. One would guess that you could argue that the Christian life is really a little of both. We have to be humbled, and sometimes we're going to face humiliation. But nonetheless, it's a picture, I think, at this point, in this point of the story, and only in this point of the story, that what lies ahead is not going to be easy. Gird up thy loins, if you will. You put on that armor for a reason. The reason we put that armor on you is because we're sending you out, and there are enemies lurking. Be prepared for them. Okay? So the porter's honest with him about this man. Which leads us to the last paragraph of the section. Well, good porter, said Christian, the Lord be with thee, and add all thy blessings, much increase for the kindness that thou hast shown to me. So he's thankful for this place that he has been in and for the porter that has helped him in that place, been honest with him, at least, of where he's going. And so he asks blessings upon him for all that he has done for him. And I think this is a reminder that we should be grateful for the church. This should be our attitude in regards to the church. It's not an obligation to us as Christians. It's a place of joy and gratitude. I'm going to make the argument, not this week, but next, that the primary attribute Paul lists as part of the new self is gratitude. You're going to see it numerous times in the next few verses of Colossians 3. So we should be grateful for the church. Now, let's be clear, the church ain't perfect. Right? One that's perfect. And if I went to a church that was perfect, it would no longer be perfect. Because I would be there. Right? That's how it goes. Right? Or as Groucho Marx used to say, I would never be a part of an organization that would have me as a member. Right? But the church isn't perfect. But nonetheless, what Christ has given to us is this institution, this organism, his very body, as these things, a place where we learn and we grow in understanding of him and what he has revealed to us and all of what he has done and what he's doing, what he's going to do. These things we learn. He's given to us all what we need to go out into the world and deal with the reality of living our lives. We have a place of sanctuary that we can come together, even as we are tonight, midweek, to get away from all the other stuff and come and say, hey, let's fellowship together. Let's spend some time in and around the Word and grow and be edified and be strengthened. And then we're sent out prepared with a hope of what God has promised to us. So we should be grateful for that. We should be grateful for that. The church is Christ's organism. So we should be grateful for it. Then he began to go forward. But then, said Christian, as it was difficult coming up, so far as I can see, it is a dangerous thing going down. For it is a hard matter for a man to go down into the valley of humiliation and to catch no slip by the way. Okay, so Christian walks out the door of Palace Beautiful, waves goodbye to those, and then turns to face where he's going and says, this isn't going to be easy. This is going to be hard. And I realize it now. I'm recognizing that. He's admitting that it's a dangerous thing going down. It's a hard matter for a man to go down into the valley of humiliation. It's a hard thing for a man to be either humbled, if we want to look at it that way, or humiliated, if you want to look at it that way. It's a hard thing for us to have to face the realities of what is required of us and where we're going and what we're going to deal with. And to catch no slip by the way is, in other words, of saying, not slipping off the path, not slipping in sinfulness or doubt or turning back in apostasy or whatever. It's hard, and to catch no slip by the way, it's hard to go in this direction. It's hard to carry on. And rightly so. So he's admitting that. But then there's an interesting sentence at the end. Then I saw in my dream that these good companions gave him a loaf of bread, a bottle of wine, and a cluster of raisins. Now, notice that Bunyan goes back to the dreamer making a comment here, inserting a comment into the story. And in the dream, he sees the companions. Now, the only conclusion I could come to is the good companions must be those that were back at the Palace Beautiful, right? I mean, what other companions are there? So it's got to be those who were with him there in that place, who did, in fact, give him one more thing beyond the armor that he had and the assurance of seeing the delectable mountains. They gave him a loaf of bread, a bottle of wine, and a cluster of raisins. But you'll notice that Bunyan didn't add a biblical reference here. So I found one. I don't know if this is the one that Bunyan is thinking of, but it's the one that most fits, in my mind, most fits the picture. It's found in 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel chapter 16. This is a picture of just after David is anointed king. You see it in the earlier part of chapter 16. Saul is still alive. David is anointed as king, even though he's not yet going to be able to take up his place as the king. So he's going to spend some time named by Samuel as the king and anointed by Samuel as the king, with Saul still on the throne. And we know, of course, if you know the story that plays out from 1 Samuel. 2 Samuel. You people were shaking your heads looking at me like, what is this guy talking about? And the answer, the whole story didn't sound right to me in the first place, because I read through this earlier today again to remind myself. It's about David, but not this early. Okay, this is much later in David's life. All right, this is after David has had his tryst with Bathsheba, and his son Absalom rebels against him. Okay, that's not at the beginning of David's life. Trust me, it's much later. So my apologies for getting that wrong. It didn't, like I said, didn't sound right. So now David is troubled by the fact that his son has revolted against him, and he's forced, earlier in chapter 15, to have to flee from Jerusalem. He has to run from the city. He's still king, but Absalom stages a coup. And David doesn't want to kill his eldest son. Well, it's not his eldest son. Doesn't want to kill his son, Absalom. So he runs instead. And so he's out away from Jerusalem, and he has some friends, one by the name of Mephibosheth. You remember Mephibosheth was the lame son of Jonathan that became his friend. Jonathan was his friend, and David promised to take care of Mephibosheth after Jonathan died. And so Mephibosheth, I think, here repays the kindness of David. Notice what it says. When David had passed a little beyond the summit, had gone a little beyond the summit is mentioned up earlier in chapter 15 in the Kidron wilderness. When he had passed a bit beyond the summit, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him with a couple of donkeys saddled, bearing, now catch this, 200 loaves of bread, 100 bunches of raisins, 100 of summer fruits, and a skin of wine. Okay, that matches almost exactly the list that is given here at the end of this section. So what's the point of these things? Well, if we read further, it says, The king said to Ziba, why have you brought these? Okay, why have you brought these to me? Ziba answers, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine, get this now, for those who faint in the wilderness to drink. What are they designed to be? They're designed to be comforts in the midst of your trials now that you've run away from Jerusalem and your men are with you, and you may think that you have nobody to help you and you're all alone. You're not. Mephibosheth says, I've sent my servant Ziba to help you. This is what I'm going to give you. I think that's the picture that's being painted here when Bunyan puts this in the text. Not only did they armor him with what he'd need to be safe from the enemies, and not only did they show him the Delectable Mountains, and not only did they warn him about what's coming, but they also provided for him some creature comforts to help him along the way. The kinds of things that we need just to have assurances and comfort and so forth. You are about to go on an arduous journey. Here's a few things that will help you along the way. Here's a few things. It reminds me very much of all of the people that brought food to our house when Deb had her surgery. Nobody brought any clusters of raisins, and nobody brought me any wine. But nonetheless, they were all very comforting. What did they imply? They implied a fellowship, a sense of, well, look, the only thing we can do is to give you some things that will help you, right? We can't change your wife's situation, but we can help you in this. That's the picture. It's those comforts that we give to one another, supports and helps along the way that we give, just as Mephibosheth's servant brought to David to bring to him what he would need in the days ahead. So these good companions have sent Christian on his way from the Palace Beautiful, and now he is prepared to go and deal with what is up ahead. He has what he needs to go. I think it's a tremendous picture of what the church is supposed to be. I think Bunyan, as I said, had a high view of the church, and I appreciate it because this is really what we are about. First and foremost, we're about who is the Lord of the hill. What do we know of him? What is it revealed to us? What does it mean to be his followers, etc.? Secondly, it's a place where we are prepared, we are armored with what we need to go out and deal with the realities of this world. And then thirdly, we are given the hope of where we're going. We should always be listening for that hope. And then finally, we support each other in the physical realm as well as we go out on this journey together away from the church. It's a beautiful picture, isn't it? So Christians spend some time at the Palace Beautiful talking about and learning more about the graciousness of the Lord of the hill.